Nicole, welcome to the show. It is so great to finally meet you.
Well, it's great to meet you as well. I'll put a face to the name.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you so much for being the Top Music Sheets composer for this month. I'm delighted to be able to share your music with our members. And I've been playing through the music. I love the variety of time signatures, the keys. Oh my goodness, we're going to have to talk about keys soon because you've really actually challenged me. I'm going to be playing some of your music and I bet I'm going to be making some mistakes because of the keys. But I also like there's melody sort of moving between the hands and things. You've got a fugue. I felt like you're channeling, there's definitely some Bach. I reckon there's some Mozart. So just a great mix of styles. And I know your collection will really appeal to everybody. So yes, thank you so much. I'd love to find out more about your composition work and your background and history and things like that today. But why don't we actually, I might just start with one of your pieces. The first piece in the book is called Procession in F major. It's written for both hands to be playing in the bass clef. And I think you wrote this for a particular student, is that right?
Yes, so this is a former cellist who came to me as a teen and came in with a lot of anxiety about sort of refreshing her bass clef skills. I think there had been a year or two in between kind of leaving the cello aside and picking up the piano. And, I do realize she may have been on the autism spectrum as well. And so it was more comfortable for her to stay in bass clef for the time being. And I also recognize there's so many kids who just need to drill bass clef. So I thought it was a nice opportunity to write a piece that wouldn't sound childish, where both hands were in bass clef and where we got to start working on the alignment of working with 2, 3, and 4, kind of not using the thumb and 5 as much, although she had some experience as a cellist with that.
There's also some, great practice for 2 and 3 note slurs as well. So here's how this, I'll just play the start of it anyway. And I like that. It's almost, it's kind of jazzy. A little bit
Well,
faster
yeah,
and you have a
that's a
walking
lick.
bass.
Well, that's a lick that jazz kind of took from Partimento. So of course my pet teaching interest and that informs my composition is Partimento and Galant schema theory, which are the classical licks. And I mean that fed directly into the jazz tradition. I won't claim to know very much at all about jazz, but just as jazz people learn licks, these 18th century composers and improvisers and performers were taught these licks. And if they got a bass line that said, and they knew they were in the key of F, they knew that it was the Fonte, which is,
Ah, yeah.
and they would know. Now, they also knew that you don't normally start with that. That kind of happens in the middle, and then Beethoven went into a cello sonata and just decided to troll everyone and start with one. So I don't know this sonata very well. I just like to use it as an example. It goes, and then he kind of retakes the phrase, and it's in everything sort of 5/3. So so the left hand just does that. But Beethoven is trolling you there because he knew that lick and that it doesn't usually open a piece.
Nice, nice. You
So
clearly
that added
have
a lot of meaning.
you clearly have quite a strong theoretical and historical musical background. Have you? I'm assuming you might have studied at university, perhaps.
Yes, so I did bachelor's and master's in music theory, went all the way through the dissertation stage of the PhD in music theory, kind of fell into collaborative piano accidentally, and I did composition minors through all of this. The collaborative piano ended up kind of sucking me in, and so I've been doing a lot of performing. I really love private teaching. I saw my husband really struggle on the academic job market for a while, and I've really had no desire to make that my life. I'm really happy teaching privately, writing great educational music that fills needs, and I'm also a staff accompanist or guest artist on Basso Continuo at Vanderbilt here, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, by the way. If that wasn't information that was up there
Yeah,
somewhere.
I didn't ask you that,
Um,
so that's good to know. I mean, that's quite the portfolio career. You've got many things going on. What's your amount of composing that you do versus all the other things? Is it a small part of your role or fairly substantial?
I would say that in terms of time, it is a small part of my role just because the everyday things, just running a studio. I mean, about a third to a half of my studio at any given time is modern and historical composition. Of course, I also teach piano. I do teach theory, sometimes in a supporting role to college students who are struggling or students who are applying to graduate programs. Um, but I'm sort of fitting composition around the other things. And I do have a commission project that I'm chipping away on for a set of art songs
Right.
that I'm in a team with three other composers, and we are all contributing 3 or 4 art songs each to
Nice.
this project. And but kind of when I'm left to my own devices, I'm usually writing things that fill a need for my adult students, and then I've discovered that they fill needs for other types of students. But my teaching specialty is adult students, so that's where I've seen that there's just a big hole in the market and what's available.
For teaching or for repertoire?
Oh, repertoire. Well, teaching to a point. I mean, a lot of teachers just aren't comfortable working with adults, so that is also a hole. But yeah, there is such a hole in terms of good repertoire for adults, and also good repertoire that teaches tonal grammar accurately. Just because the partimento and schema stuff has not been super available to modern students. Maybe 15, 20 years ago, it started getting out there. More people began rediscovering it, and it gained greater awareness, aside from a few people. So, yeah, it really does have huge potential to teach us how to write pedagogical music that is grammatically accurate, teaches those licks, really sets up kids and adults well for learning the standard rep.
So I thought I might play a little bit of another piece, 3+2 step. We've got a piece of music in 5/8. I love unusual time signatures. So we'll have a listen to a bit of this, and then you can tell us how you go about teaching this, or why you think these unusual time signatures are either fun to teach or important to teach. So this is 3+2 step. And I'm probably not getting all the 2-note slurs. There's lots of phrasing in there that you've written. Yeah, tell me a little bit about this piece and other unusual time signature pieces for you.
Yeah, well, I struggled with them growing up just because I tend to really rely on grammatical knowledge and theoretical knowledge in order to get around repertoire. As well, I did as a student, and I mean now as sort of an adult collaborative pianist. And so I think these things should be introduced as early as is reasonable. There is one piece in Bartók's Mikrokosmos that is in 5 that I teach fairly often. It's a little Mixolydian thing. And so my thoughts about the mode names notwithstanding, which means they're not really accurate to what was happening in the Renaissance, but it's a fun piece. I just kind of wish there were more of them, and that were sort of not as tonally quirky as Bartók can be. For anyone who's familiar with Mikrokosmos, sometimes he's in a diatonic scale. Sometimes it's just doing all kinds of strange things, but sometimes you just need to introduce the time signature in a friendly way with little other complication. So that's why it kind of stays in the same 5-finger compass. The student doesn't have to worry about shifting or any of that stuff. They can just kind of deal with the time signature.
Yeah, and I think getting the feel of the time signature into the student well before they try and play anything is really important, whether on percussion or drums or something. Because once you are in, I think the hardest thing about unusual time signatures is actually when they change. And if you go from 5/8 to 4/4 or something and back, that's what I find difficult. I find once I'm in the swing of a 7/8 or a 5/8, it's actually not too bad. But that's a super fun little piece.
Yeah.
So tell me about your childhood lessons. Did you have a fairly traditional upbringing?
So, yeah, I was close to 6. So it would have been kindergarten, and I have a January birthday. And so this was a young teacher in the area, and it was actually pretty much Suzuki, which was really kind of bad for my neurological needs. And I have a lot of thoughts about its suitability for the piano. None of them are positive.
Right.
But
Okay.
yeah, so really, I had some pieces that I was kind of playing through that, but it was not until so this teacher had relocated sort of for unrelated reasons, and I entered the pre-college program at Michigan, which is called the Piano Pedagogy Laboratory Program. It's still running. It's pretty large. And they have an extremely heavy written theory emphasis, and the reason for that is they will enroll you in the Michigan Music Teachers Association state tests, and that feeds into the MTNA competition and all that. Every state has something similar here in the U.S. It's probably the closest we have to an exam syllabus, because in the U.S., the exams are not nearly as big of a thing as they are everywhere else. But it's roughly like Royal Conservatory, if you've ever seen that.
Yeah.
It's leveled about that way. And so we really had this heavy written theory emphasis, and also a lot of emphasis playing duets. So that was really kind of what I needed to get some reading skills kind of work in a way that works for what my brain and learning style need. And then that really kind of got me into some of the standard repertoire, that gives the examples of tonal grammar that I would eventually be working in. And, I was always composing. I mean, I was not composing more than actually practicing, because I had issues retaining anything that isn't sort of in front of me. And so I would be goofing off and not actually practicing repertoire. But then, we do all this theory stuff through the PPLP, and I am much more equipped to start writing things down. And I was always, kind of on and off composing for fun. I would occasionally play something at a studio recital. And then I ended up getting a theory degree at Michigan, because that seemed to be kind of the most logical way to get a music degree there. And I was actually starting a technique rehab right before I started at Michigan, so the timing was very interesting.
That sounds like a tough job, a technique rehab, which means you realised that something about your technique needed to change, and that was the point at which you did it. Is that right?
Yes, and well, it was really, I was referred to a teacher. I graduated out of the PPLP, and so you're just kind of graduated out of there by the time you graduate from high school. And this teacher happened to know exactly how to work with people with genetic hypermobility, as I do. So the colloquial term for that is you're double jointed.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And so she was able to start that rehab process. But I did study with Louis Nagel also while I was at Michigan, and he and Michelle worked very well together. He just wouldn't really mess with the technique, but he was very good at choosing repertoire. And so I was giving full recitals, kind of doing all the piano major things, getting my technique sorted. Went straight to IU for the theory degree. Figured, they gave me a nice fellowship and the TA position, which they give to all incoming theory majors. And so it worked out. Figured, okay, I'll be teaching in classrooms, and that'll be nice and stable. And I mean, the academic job market did not stay stable. But I did discover a love of collaborative piano while I was there, because that's a school with 300 singers at any given time.
Yeah, I can imagine all the accompanying that goes on. I might jump in and interrupt with In the Style of a Pavan, which is, I think the next two pieces actually this and the, would you say Sena? S-C-E-N-A? How do you pronounce that?
Yeah, well, the Shana.
Shanna in B minor, which is very kind of Beethoven to me anyway. These two really reminiscent of other styles, I think. So, what am I doing? So we're in A flat now. hope I'm playing that in the right kind of style.
Yeah, I'd even take the edge off the tempo. Let it be very stately.
Yes. Okay.
And so it'll be attainable for an adult who maybe they play the French horn or they played the flute at some point and they read well enough, but they're learning how to operate on the piano.
Right.
And they want something that sounds substantial and not, kittens playing.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah. It's got a real kind of depth, stately, as you say, that kind of sound to it. The second one, sorry, go on.
Yeah, the adult beginners, they do tend to get pretty self-conscious about, well, this stuff that I'm playing right now, it sounds like the stuff that these 6-year-olds are playing in my studio, and so, this is...
Yeah, you want to be able to separate.
Contribute.
Yeah. So the Shena in B minor, I'd be interested to know what that means. I'll play a little bit of it and I'll see what the listeners kind of think of the feeling and the composer who I think it's reminiscent of. Got lots of two-note kind of phrasing and phrase shaping to do there. So tell what is this piece? And did I get it right with the whole feels like Beethoven to me? Or Mozart maybe?
Well, it could be. I mean...
Or Haydn even.
So as I noted, during my time at IU, I really started accompanying a lot of singers, getting really immersed in the opera literature and, of course, art song literature. But IU was just renowned for its opera program. They stage 6 operas a year. And they can.
Wow.
Which is just wild for any school. So, one thing I thought would be kind of fun to try would be to capture an opera scene at the piano, even kind of a miniature, because this was intended for opening doors, and then I kind of recalibrated the difficulty level that I wanted to go for, and this didn't quite make the cut. But I really kind of wanted to see how my experience with opera could be translated into something for solo piano.
Right.
And I was also in potential talks with a friend to have something commissioned, and this friend is a big opera fan as well, and it's something I was kind of thinking about, so I just thought it would be fun to try. I have a couple students who enjoy opera as well, but would not really have the skill set yet to be going in and accompanying arias.
Right. So who would you say are your influences? Or even people that you admire that are current living composers too?
I would say, my influences tend to be, of the common practice deceased composer variety. I would say certainly Bach and Mozart and Beethoven and all those people. Also the bel canto, like Donizetti, Bellini, people like that.
Yep.
Who you don't necessarily engage with much unless you're accompanying a lot.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. And any modern day composers that you admire? Living composers?
Well, I'll say I tend not to hang out in the new music world all that much. I mean, there is a growing community of historical composers. And they're writing not necessarily pedagogical music. A lot of it is still concert music, but written kind of for Baroque ensembles. So there are probably too many people to name in a setting like this who I think are doing some very nice work. But there is the Partimento community, the Schema community. There's a number of people who are writing some good stuff. It's not pedagogical, of course, or maybe it's pedagogical for different things, sort of teaching how to write rather than teaching how to play.
Play, yeah.
But yeah, and I mean, I do certainly teach a number of living composers as far as in the studio setting and all of that, although they're not necessarily going for a historical sound. It's just whatever my student needs at the time.
Yep, no, that makes sense. So the next piece in the book is Meditation in F minor. I love this, but it's quite different. This it could be reminiscent of Bach, or it could be almost reminiscent of Jan Tiersen or a movie composer of today. So I'll play a little bit of this one, and you'll get that sense of it kind of flowing. Love that little sequence. And it goes on. Sorry, there's another few bars, but we haven't got a huge amount of time. So that one, yeah, it sounds like it kind of has a modern feel, but it's also very Baroque.
Yeah, that one was written for a specific student, and this was. I mean, a lot of people in a lot of the groups sort of know this story, mostly because of the student's mom. But this is a very bright and autistic young lady who's had sort of very specific repertoire tastes. We went through this whole process of getting her out of positions, and of course, she was very bright. I didn't need to hide the funky keys for her, and she sort of liked that dark kind of sound, the moody sort of styles. And there's really not that much in that style that can work for a kid-sized hand, and at a student level, and this posed another opportunity for me to write something.
So do you, out of all of your composing work that you do, would you say most of it has a pedagogical focus, or not necessarily?
I'd say at this time, definitely. The majority of it is pedagogical.
Yeah.
It's where I've figured that my particular skill set is sort of best applied. And then it's great to see your piece fill an immediate need.
Yes.
It's a little sort of dopamine boost, I guess.
Yeah.
And in a way that, I have many, many dear friends who are fully in the concert music world, and it's such a struggle to get anything performed. They're worrying about how innovative they're going to sound. Whether
or how hard
this
something
ensemble,
is. Is it hard enough?
Right, or will this academic department accept it? And I just don't love playing that game. I don't think trying to aim for innovation for its own sake is necessarily valuable or very doable. And I love writing things that are beautiful and that immediately serve a purpose and touch the audience and the player. And I think pedagogical music has really been a nice way for me to do that. Some people do this by going into film music, which is a world I'm just not involved in at all. But so there are some various outlets for that. But yeah, I was kind of tired of the concert music scene. I mean, I'm still in it a bit, but I'm really happy kind of turning my skill set into something that's sort of immediately gratifying for somebody.
Yeah, and also, I mean, looking at it from a business sense as well, I mean, it's more likely to be an income source as well than something that might be played one day by some music department or a commission that comes in. I mean, we all need great fresh music, which is why we create these collections. So, all right, I've got to talk about keys now because the next piece is in C sharp major. So C sharp major is the same as D flat major. But I must say, I do find it hard to read. It's going to be tricky for me to read because I keep changing keys all the time. But let me play a little bit of this. I'm not going to go too presto, but we'll all get the sense of this is in 3/8 presto in C sharp major. Here we go. I won't go too far. Tell me, why have you chosen these keys? Is it just to make someone like me have to sight read harder?
Well, it's to make all that future sight reading less hard when you get to stuff like the Wild Temper Clavier, the Book 1, the infamous C sharp major prelude and fugue. And because I do get a fair number of students who read fine because they play the French horn or something, but so they can use the challenge, but they're just learning how to get around the keys as pianists. These could also be good for college, or I should say university, because you all say college is high school. But like university music majors, they have to take secondary piano. They're already very musically minded. They're playing major repertoire on their instruments, and they want something they can sink their teeth into at the piano, but they don't have piano fingers necessarily.
Right.
So this was another one that was supposed to be an opening doors, and then I realized it was a little harder than I wanted. So sort of an opening doors reject, but maybe there's a space for that space between opening doors and venturing beyond, which we'll get to in some of the other pieces. So,
I mean,
it's gonna be an
it's
opportunity to learn the licks and say, well, yeah, this is just your, so that's just your printer. And then maybe they've practiced it in C sharp major, maybe they haven't, and you can catch them. Ideally, they've practiced those in all their major and minor keys if they're my historical composition students. But
I mean, I think introducing kids to jigs is like great fun. It's like tarantellas. Like they're just fun to learn, right? So I think it's great.
The solfeggetto. I mean, how many times do you teach the solfeggetto in a year?
Yeah, correct. That's exactly right. I was interested to know, how did you go about choosing the pieces for this particular collection?
It was because, well, initially it was in a bit of a panic because I thought I was contributing to a multi-author collection and I didn't want to monopolize it, so I chose a few pieces, and then Albert sort of poked me and said, oh, actually, you get all the space in this book, and I said, oh, okay, and then I pulled some representative things that I thought might show different sides of my style, as different as they could be, maybe. And so it was a little bit last minute, but I thought it got a decent array of levels in there and styles and all of that. So I hope it'll find something to appeal to various student types and whatever a teacher might need.
Yeah. No, I do. I think it's a great mix, and a good mix, particularly with regard to the keys and the time signatures. And we do have quite a few collections that are more of the elementary level. So this is great that it's kind of intermediate, late intermediate, because we all have students that need a variety of music. We don't have time to play everything. There's a Daydream in E, which is it's quite. I mean, it's completely different to all the other ones that we've been playing. So I do love that, but I wanted to get onto the fuguetta because it's pretty rare that a modern composer will write a fugue. I find fugues really hard to play. So tell me, how hard are they to write? Because I don't know, Bach could just write thousands of them, but he was crazy, right?
Well, I mean, I am heavily trained. I could throw myself under the bus a little bit. I've got this entire folder of terrible fugues I attempted to write in high school. Because one summer when I was at the Interlochen Arts Camp, there was a 2-week program they used to run, and our theory professor just decided to show us fugue form for some reason. We're a bunch of like 15 and 16-year-olds who were probably not ready for it, but I just thought this was the coolest thing ever, and I started writing a bunch of terrible fugues. When I got home on my bootleg software that was called Mozart, but it would have a watermark between each system, and it was just the jankiest thing ever. But it got me comfortable with notation programs at least, but I just had a lot of training. And then at Michigan, all due to these very random circumstances, I was able to get into the counterpoint class with Kevin Corson, who was probably the toughest of the counterpoint teachers, so I had heard. But he has a direct line to the Partimento tradition due to a couple people he studied with, and so he was probably the best person I could have worked with for the Baroque counterpoint training. And then we had to take 2 semesters for the degree that I was in, and so we did end up writing fugues. So basically I got a ton of training, and then as I sort of leaned more heavily into private teaching, I realized, wow, all these pedagogical fugues are either just expositions or they are terrible. And maybe I can help fix that.
I do like it. Let me play a little bit of it. I'm not going to try and play too much because I just get tied in knots. And sight reading fugues, I think, is one of the hardest things. That's for me anyway.
Oh, I'm not sure I would even sight read a fugue.
Okay.
Honestly.
So here's our theme. And I might stop there because it'll get.
So that was the exposition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I put together a series of books for the Australian Music Exam Boards back in 2016, and I managed to find a fugue from a South African composer actually, which I really loved, and I put that in the collection because I think it's great to share modern versions of this style of writing, and I think this is fantastic, and it's accessible too. This is what are we talking? It's intermediate, I guess, but not horrendously difficult. It's not going to take someone too long to learn this, I don't think, which I think is great.
And I'm interested in that fugue from that South African composer because I'm always looking for more. And so maybe afterward you can.
Yeah, his name's Edwin Randall, if you want to write it down. Edwin Randall, yeah. I can't remember, fugue in F minor, I think it was. And great, yeah, again, great fun to explore. Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So,
I get these students in historical composition where sometimes they'll have only studied piano for 6 months or something, but they really love that Baroque style, and something like my fugue or this other fugue would be exactly what they need because they really need the good grammatical exemplars.
yes.
But they're not even a year into studying the instrument, so that happens more often than you would think.
By the way, when you were talking about your composing, your teacher, counterpoint teacher, I thought you said he's going to have a direct line to Bach.
Well, we all do that with the pedagogical family trees, and at some point, kind of everybody can trace to Bach.
Yeah, that's that's mine there.
Yeah, because my teacher Michelle Cooker studied with George Chandor, and then there's the line to Bartok, and then to Liszt, and then you can trace it back. I mean, everybody sort of traces to Bach, and it's sort of fun to talk about, but I don't know if that's particularly unusual at this point.
No, I don't. I think I would tend to agree there. What sort of advice before we get on? I'll probably just play a little bit of. Actually, you've got. Yeah, we probably won't have time to play much more. You've got 2 amazing final pieces in the collection. But I wanted to ask, did you have any advice for other teachers who maybe have a bit of a portfolio career and they're, accompanying, they're composing, about getting their music out there? You've talked about being a pedagogical composer as being one element, but how do you, or what advice would you give to other teachers who are interested, or students for that matter, interested in composing?
Well, really, get that hardcore partimento galant schema training. That is the way to be writing really grammatically solid tonal music. That will already set you apart because that type of training just hasn't been around for long enough to be accessible to everyone. So there is a lot of music out there where the grammar is funky, and that actually makes students mess up. If they've developed an innate sense of the grammar, they're going to be making mistakes if there's a set of parallel fits that are very obvious, or there's a seventh that doesn't resolve. They're going to keep wanting to slur down when that seventh should resolve down, and if it doesn't, then that's adding to the difficulty in the learning process, and that's not something we want in a pedagogical work. So really getting that heavy sort of training, shameless plug, that's about 1/3 to 1/2 of my studio at any given time is teaching that kind of stuff. But also really just identifying holes in the market and just hitting them and writing what needs to be there. So a piece at the early intermediate level in C sharp major, there's just really not that many of those.
Yes, true. So you've used this phrase portamento schema. I haven't heard this before.
So portamento's different. That's a singer thing.
Yeah.
So maybe
what are you saying? Partamento.
Yeah. So I don't know if this chat will be visible to people, but I'll just type it out. And I'll throw a shameless plug for some friends of mine who have created a free open music theory textbook where they talk about galant schemas. They don't really talk about partimento, but it's a good
Wait,
start.
did you say
And it's free.
galant? What was the other
Yeah,
one?
so galant, like the galant era.
Oh, okay, gallant,
Which is
gallant,
that,
gallant.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
that part. Yeah, I think that's the American versus Australian pronunciation, but it's that era that pianists forget about because Bach was so old school, and then we imagine that music just went straight from Bach to Mozart, which it didn't.
Okay.
Uh, because Bach was sort of stubbornly old school in the way he wrote, but Scarlatti would sometimes write in the galant style, depending on how he felt that day. People like Solid wrote a little more in that style. The very young Haydn
Right.
as well.
Okay.
So that's kind of where the schema study got started, although those schemas are all over the tonal literature. So I'll just put a link to the open music theory chapter in case anyone wants to see it or can see it.
Okay. We can put this in our. We'll put this in the description in our show notes.
Sure. Yeah, it's a totally free college level textbook. I know people who are using it to teach their classes just so people don't have to pay for a textbook. So
Right,
it's
brilliant.
really, really solid.
Always love free things. That's great because I meant to ask you earlier on, and you've used that phrase a few times. So it's good that we've now got a reference that we can share with people. So your last two pieces, you've got an arioso in D sharp minor. Which is beautifully expressive. You've got, it's just kind of flowing. And then the last piece, I'm not even going to try and play. You can perhaps pronounce it and tell us a little bit more about that one because that is quite a substantial work.
Well, the title translates to Reminiscences from Spain, and this was the first in my vignettes collection, which prepares late intermediate to early advanced players for Ravel, because Ravel really did not leave us much at the student level.
Yes.
I discovered this. I had two separate students who were studying with me kind of at overlapping times, and they both really had trouble with Impressionist rep. In one case, it was kind of the classic exam-based upbringing where you were only playing like 3 pieces every year, and I know good teachers make sure that doesn't happen, but in this case, her vocabulary was really stunted. She had not played a lot of stuff in diverse styles. She really wanted to play the Debussy Reverie, but it was a struggle because she just didn't have that background, and I thought, what if I could help provide that? I did a literature review, and I found some good collections that were sort of Debussy preparatory, but then I realized none of it was really Ravel preparatory, and I think they are different enough to be worth having their own preparatory repertoire, especially I find Ravel pretty awkward.
Yeah.
And so I set off on that project kind of for the benefit of these two students. The other one was just an ear player who had not been caught. And I caught her. And I started making her read. I just spotted a hole in the market and said, well, this seems like a cool project and something that would be enjoyable to write. So that was the first of the set. I love Spanish music. I love Spain. I minored in Spanish at Michigan. The cruise gigs, our first cruise ship went to several ports in Spain. I loved it. So it was just a nice opportunity to channel Ravel and Spain. That project was something I was poking away at. Now, we had moved to Cleveland for my husband's job and then pandemic. But then I got the 5 pieces in there, and that has been a nice sized collection, I think, to get people started.
I think it's fantastic for people who are looking to teach at those more advanced levels and have students interested in that Ravel. Great to know that we now have a piece of music that can lead students there. Because as you say, you're right. You know, if people want to play Beethoven, then we've got Clementi at the introductory stage. Then we've got easier Beethoven moving through. There's obviously other composers that sort of piano sonata form as well. But you're right. There are gaps in some of these other jumping to some of these other composers. With Spanish too, Ginastera is Spanish?
He is from Argentina.
Oh, Argentina. Yeah.
So, which is another place we visited on the cruise gigs, and I absolutely loved. And
yes, love that style. Well, everything to do with the Latin American style, I think is great. Nicole, we better wrap things up. Thank you so much again for this collection. And for people watching this, make sure you come, if you'd like to grab a copy of this collection, it's studio licensed. It's a fantastic resource for your studio and your students. Even if you haven't got a student for it right now, grab it, play it yourself, practice C sharp minor and D sharp minor and major, and it'll be really, really great for you to have in your collection. So it's available on any of our Top Music Pro plans, including our light plan, $10 a month. It's at topmusicpro.com. Nicole, where can people go to find out more about your music if they would like to explore it some more?
So I have a hybrid artist website and score storefront at, I guess I should probably type this in. It's N DiPaolo, so first initial last name .musicaneo.com.
All right,
and
we
I
better.
should not try to talk and type at the same time.
I try and do that all the time as well. I will put a link to that in our show notes. I'll just copy it down now as well. ndipaolo.musicaneo.com. There you go. I haven't seen that domain
great.
before.
And if you're a composer, it is a cheaper commission than Sheet Music Plus. So if you want to sell reasonably priced scores, I do recommend these guys. They watermark it if you need it for competition. And then I'll also drop my studio website link if anyone's interested. So it's a separate site, studio-dipalo-weebly.com.
Fantastic.
So
all right.
that is just the studio side of things.
That's great.
Not the storefront.
And we'll have that link to the schema as well, more information about that. Thank you for teaching me a number of things today. I really appreciate it. I've got to do some more work, I think, myself. It was great to meet you, and thanks so much again for creating this collection for us, Nicole.